let me start by thanking Navi for that overview of the international human rights regime and how it applies and should apply to this global challenge. It's why we need international human rights and international norms as opposed to purely private company level or even nation state level. Navi mentioned the Universal Declaration, Article 12, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Article 17. One of the challenges that people point to is that this prohibits arbitrary or unlawful interference. And those are the kinds of words that lawyers can drive freight trains through. On the other hand, we do have increasingly accepted international norms that have been developed in a multilateral fashion and multi-stakeholder fashion, bringing in human rights defenders and civil society to have some sense as to what we mean by that in the AI era, the digital world we now inhabit, rather than the old analog rules that worked in the physical world. One way I like to think about this, I'm a human rights practitioner, I head up our human rights team at Microsoft, is to think about how we've seen this evolve and where we would like it as human rights practitioners, where we'd like to see this evolve. I even think of it as privacy 1.0 was notice and consent. The idea that if you went onto a website, you would say, click here to give your notice and consent. But there were always questions, how much real understanding and how much choice about consent did you have if it was an all or nothing. Privacy 2.0, which I view as kind of the GDPR, the data protection regulation from Europe, was more about access and control. That not only did you give notice and consent, but you should have access to what people are collecting and some control over it. What I like to point out is both of these actually require end user diligence. To protect your human rights, you need to become an expert in digital technologies and able to read the fine print of the provisions being provided. So one of the things I've been talking about in the global human rights community is the idea of a privacy 3.0, which would be, let's govern companies' personal data collection and uses in the first place. Make some forms of data collection, some types of uses, unlawful in the sense that under the International Covenant, where you're not allowed to conduct do things that violate and constitute arbitrary and unlawful interference with privacy. Let's define what is an unlawful and what is effectively an arbitrary interference with a legitimate, very fundamental right in the human rights regime, which is your right to privacy. There's no real hierarchy in human rights. Freedom of expression matters, privacy matters. Of course, you can go all the way through the International Covenants on Civil and Political or Economic, Social, Cultural Rights. All of them are interrelated, all of them depend, but there is no question that things like privacy are at the very core of human dignity and the right to form our own opinions, exercise our own agency, make decisions that aren't informed by what others are going to, how others might use that for their benefit or against us. I'll stop there so we have others who participate. I will say, if you're interested in how we've approached it as Microsoft, we have out on the web, we believe in transparency and in-user control. We have a privacy dashboard for any of the Microsoft products or services. So we have a Microsoft privacy statement, and then lots of detail with links as to how you go into the Microsoft properties to set the preferences you want. Do you want advertising to reflect what we know about the data you've permitted us to use? You allow that. If you'd prefer not to, you click the no, and you'll get less targeted advertising, perhaps less relevant, less interesting, but it won't be based upon use of your data. And in all instances, we're very clear. We do not believe it's appropriate. So we're in our public statements, we're very clear. We promise we're not going to use what we call content-based advertising and targeting. That is, we won't use anything in your email or your chat, any of your files you stored through Windows, your voicemail, your pictures. Any of that personal data will not inform the way we might target advertising to you if you'd prefer more personalized advertising. But we do think that we ought to be providing choice, and there ought to be some things we just do not do by default. So I'll stop there to let others speak and then look forward to coming back in.